Imagine living through the one moment in history when the entire planet holds its breath at the same time, not because a war is beginning, but because of one brutal question. Can they actually do it? In July 1969, with the Cold War splitting the world into rival blocs and the space race turning technology into a global scoreboard, the United States put everything on the line for a mission that could not be allowed to fail. If it went wrong, it wouldn't be a private disaster. It would be a public one, witnessed by millions, stamped into history as proof that the promise was bigger than the nation's ability to deliver. This wasn't just about science. It was about prestige, fear, innovation, and a vow made in front of cameras and microphones. Send a human being to the moon and bring them back safely before the decade ended. When NASA launched Apollo 11 from Kennedy Space Center on July 16, 1969, the world wasn't simply watching a rocket rise. It was watching a country attempt something so extreme that success would redefine what possible even meant. On board were 3 men carrying the weight of that promise in silence. Neil Armstrong, the commander, Edwin Buzz Aldrin, the lunar module pilot, and Michael Collins, the command module pilot, who would have the loneliest job of all, remaining in lunar orbit, while the other 2 descended to a surface no human had ever touched. Apollo 11 did not appear out of nowhere. It was the decisive chapter in a story written under pressure for more than a decade, beginning with the shock of Sputnik 1 in 1957, when the Soviet Union placed the first artificial satellite into orbit and forced the United States to confront a terrifying reality. The rival power could master the sky, and the implications went far beyond science. Then came Yuri Gagarin in 1961, the first human in space, another Soviet first that hit like a thunderclap. In that climate, President John F. Kennedy issued a challenge that sounded impossible on purpose. Land a man on the moon and return him safely to Earth before the 1960s ended. But promises at that scale demand a price, and Apollo paid it. The program suffered a catastrophe that nearly broke it, the Apollo 1 fire, which killed 3 astronauts during a ground test and forced a complete redesign of hardware, procedures, and safety culture. From that tragedy forward, every mission became a rung on a ladder built from hard lessons. Apollo 7, 8, 9, and 10 tested the spacecraft, the maneuvers, and the nerve required to commit. Apollo 11 was not a miracle. It was the final step of a chain of proof. When Apollo 11 began its journey, it carried a plan so complex that even explaining it makes you wonder how it worked in an era without modern computing as we know it. First came liftoff aboard the Saturn V, one of the most powerful rockets ever built, which placed the spacecraft into a parking orbit around Earth. That wasn't a victory lap. It was a checkpoint, a chance to confirm that everything was stable before the burn that would decide the entire mission. Then came trans-lunar injection, the moment the rocket's upper stage fired and pushed Apollo 11 out of Earth's grip onto a trajectory toward the moon. This is where the story becomes pure American documentary tension. It isn't a motivational poster. It's engineering under real risk. You don't fix it later if you miss the math. You either get the trajectory right, or you fail in the most unforgiving environment imaginable. And then comes July 20th, 1969, the day the impossible became a date on a calendar. The lunar module, Eagle, separated from the command module, Columbia, leaving Michael Collins alone in lunar orbit to keep the mothership ready for the most delicate choreography of all: rendezvous in space and the return home. Meanwhile, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin began their descent. The landing was not clean and cinematic the way history sometimes simplifies it. There were alarms. There were seconds that mattered. There was a hazardous, rocky area that forced a decision no one wanted to make at the last moment. Armstrong took manual control, flew the lunar module forward, and brought Eagle down safely in the Sea of Tranquility. Then came the transmission that still gives Americans chills when they hear it in its original calmness. Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. It wasn't just a technical call. It was a release of global tension, the sound of a nation keeping its promise in real time. After landing, the world entered a different kind of countdown. The wait for the first human step on another world. Armstrong and Aldrin prepared for their EVA, opened the hatch, descended the ladder, and when Armstrong set foot on the lunar surface, he delivered a line that didn't need perfection to become immortal. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. What happened in those moments wasn't simply walking on the moon. It was proof that an idea could survive years of pressure, tragedy, politics, and fear, and still arrive at its destination. Armstrong and Aldrin spent about 2 hours and 15 minutes on the surface, collecting samples, deploying scientific experiments, and taking photographs that would become permanent evidence of human capability. And while the world watched the footprints, Collins remained in orbit, doing the most isolated and essential job in the story, keeping Columbia healthy and ready. Because if that part failed, the triumph would turn into loss. Apollo 11 is powerful precisely because it's not a story of one hero. It's a story of a system, thousands of engineers, technicians, controllers, and pilots executing with discipline at the edge of what was known. But the victory didn't end with the first step. The mission still had to come home. Armstrong and Aldrin launched from the moon, reunited with Collins in lunar orbit, discarded Eagle, and set course back to Earth. On July 24, 1969, Apollo 11 re-entered Earth's atmosphere and splashed down in the Pacific Ocean, where the crew was recovered and placed into quarantine, because in 1969, even the possibility of unknown lunar contamination was treated with serious caution. When that splashdown succeeded, the meaning of Apollo 11 exploded beyond science. The mission didn't just meet Kennedy's deadline. It reaffirmed American leadership in technology and engineering at the most visible stage imaginable. And this is the key to making your channel pro-America without sounding like cheap propaganda. Apollo 11 isn't a boast. It's a case study. It shows a country setting an absurd goal, accepting the cost of learning, rebuilding after tragedy, and then delivering under pressure in front of the entire world. That's why Apollo 11 remains one of the clearest "Why America" stories you can tell with real facts and zero exaggeration. The moon wasn't reached by arrogance. It was reached by method, risk management, courage, and massive investment in science and engineering. The mission inspired generations, pushed innovation forward, and proved something that still resonates with American audiences. When ordinary people, engineers, welders, mathematicians, radio operators, test pilots, commit to a shared objective, the impossible can become scheduled. And when you end the episode on that note, the viewer doesn't feel like they watched propaganda. They feel like they watched the best version of the American identity. Ambition with execution, dream with discipline, courage with responsibility.